Before the first human drew breath, before the sun ignited in the void, before time learned to count its own heartbeat, there was a war that shook the foundations of reality itself. 7 beings of unimaginable power stood at the precipice of creation's greatest crisis, each wielding forces that could unmake worlds with a thought. They were not gods, though mortals would worship them as such. They were not men, though they would walk among humanity wearing flesh like armor. They were the 7 archangels, the magnificent 7, the thrones of divine will, and their names would echo through every religion, every mythology, every whispered prayer in the darkness. Michael, the unconquerable warrior; Gabriel, the divine messenger; Raphael, the master healer; Uriel, the keeper of wisdom; Chamuel, the seer of souls; Jophiel, the guardian of beauty; and Zadkiel, the angel of mercy. This is their story, the tale of 7 beings who stood between existence and annihilation, whose choices shaped every moment that would follow, whose power still reverberates through our world today. But these were not perfect beings dispensing simple justice from clouds of glory. They were complex, conflicted, magnificent, and terrible in equal measure, capable of devastating love and righteous fury, of mistakes that altered the course of creation and sacrifices that saved it. What you think you know about angels is wrong. The truth is far stranger, far more dangerous, and far more beautiful than any legend has dared to tell, until now. In the beginning, before beginning had meaning, there existed only the infinite consciousness of the Creator and the raw potential of the void. From this divine mind came the first act of creation, the Big Bang of the spiritual realm, an explosion of pure intention that crystallized into form and substance. Light poured forth, not the light of stars, but something more fundamental, the luminous essence of being itself. And from this light, the Creator fashioned the first servants, the first witnesses, the first beloved children of the infinite. They were called the seraphim, beings of pure flame who existed in constant proximity to the divine throne, singing endless songs of worship that wove the very fabric of reality. Below them came the cherubim, mighty creatures of knowledge and guardianship, beings with multiple faces and wings who served as the keepers of sacred mysteries. And below them, though below is perhaps the wrong word in a realm where spatial relationships operated by entirely different rules, came the archangels. 7 of them stood at the pinnacle of this rank, 7 beings who possessed unique and terrible gifts, 7 who would serve as the primary instruments through which divine will would be enacted throughout all of creation. They were fashioned with exquisite care, each one a masterpiece of divine artistry, each one containing within their essence a particular aspect of the Creator's infinite nature. They were not created equal, not identical copies stamped from the same mold, but rather each was unique, individual, possessed of distinct personalities and capabilities and purposes. Michael was the first among them, though in the celestial realm the concept of first carried different connotations than in the material world. He was not older than the others, for they were all brought into being in the same eternal moment, but he was primary in purpose, chief in authority, the designated commander of the heavenly host. His name meant, "who is like God," phrased as a rhetorical question, a battle cry, a statement of ultimate devotion. Michael embodied strength, courage, protection, and perfect loyalty. His appearance, in the rare moments when he took visible form, was that of a warrior king, tall and powerfully built, with features that combined masculine beauty with an edge of severity that suggested both justice and mercy balanced in perfect equilibrium. Michael's wings were not the delicate feathered appendages of artistic tradition, but rather massive structures of pure energy that could manifest as anything from blinding radiance to impenetrable shields. His primary weapon, the legendary sword that would feature in countless human stories, was not a blade of metal, but rather concentrated divine authority made manifest, a weapon that could cut through any substance, physical or spiritual, that could sever the connection between a soul and its corruption, that could defend or destroy with equal efficacy. When Michael drew this sword, reality itself bent around it, responding to the focused intention of the divine will it represented. But Michael was not merely a weapon, not simply a holy executioner. He possessed a strategic mind of staggering capability, able to perceive patterns across vast stretches of time and space, to coordinate movements of angelic forces across multiple dimensions simultaneously, to adapt to changing circumstances with lightning speed. More than this, he possessed compassion, a deep and abiding love for all of creation that motivated his protective instincts. He did not fight because he enjoyed combat, but because he understood that some things were worth fighting for, that protection sometimes required force, that mercy without strength was merely sentiment. Gabriel stood second in the hierarchy, though calling it second diminishes the unique magnificence of this being. Where Michael was the sword, Gabriel was the voice. The name meant God is my strength, or hero of God, and Gabriel embodied communication in all its forms, serving as the primary messenger between the divine and the created realms. Gabriel's appearance was often depicted as androgynous or feminine in later human traditions, and there was truth to this, for Gabriel possessed a quality that transcended the gender categories that would later define human existence. Beautiful beyond description, with features that seemed to shift depending on the needs of the observer, Gabriel could appear as whatever form would best communicate the message being delivered. Gabriel's power lay in words, but these were not mere words as humans would understand them. When Gabriel spoke, the speech was performative, creative, reality-altering. Gabriel's announcements did not simply describe what would happen, but participated in bringing it about, the message and the event intimately connected. It was Gabriel who would one day announce to a young woman in Nazareth that she would bear a child who would change everything, and in that announcement, the conceptio itself began. Gabriel's words carried the weight of divine intention, making them irresistible to those with hearts open to receive them, and terrifying to those who stood in opposition to the purposes they communicated. But Gabriel was more than a mere courier, more than a divine postal service. Gabriel understood communication in its deepest sense, understood that true message-bearing required knowing the recipient, required crafting the delivery to match the receiver's capacity to comprehend. Gabriel studied humanity with intense focus, learning their languages, their cultures, their symbols and stories, becoming fluent in every form of human expression in order to speak to them in ways they could grasp. This required immense flexibility, profound empathy, and a willingness to bridge the infinite gap between divine perfection and mortal limitation. Raphael, whose name meant God heals, embodied restoration, wholeness, and the divine desire for all things to be made right. Where Michael protected and Gabriel communicated, Raphael repaired. This archangel possessed knowledge of every form of healing, physical, emotional, spiritual, cosmic. Raphael understood the intricate workings of biological systems, could perceive the flow of energy through living beings, could identify blockages and corruptions, and apply precisely calibrated interventions to restore proper function. Raphael appeared in forms associated with healing traditions, sometimes with attributes suggesting a physician, other times with symbols of nature and growth, always with an aura of compassionate competence that inspired trust and hope. Raphael's healing power operated at every level of existence. On the material plane, Raphael could cure disease, mend injuries, even restore life to those who had recently died if it served the larger purposes of divine will. On the emotional plane, Raphael could soothe trauma, could help beings process grief and pain, could restore psychological wholeness to shattered minds. On the spiritual plane, Raphael could heal the deepest wounds of all, the separations from divine love that corrupted souls and twisted them toward darkness. This made Raphael particularly important in dealing with beings who had fallen into sin but retained some capacity for repentance, for Raphael could perceive that capacity and work to nurture it back to health. But Raphael's healing was not always gentle. Sometimes healing required cutting away diseased tissue, required breaking bones that had healed incorrectly so they could be reset properly, required the painful exposure of hidden infections so they could be cleansed. Raphael understood that mercy without wisdom could enable continuing harm, that true compassion sometimes looked harsh in the immediate moment even as it worked toward ultimate restoration. This gave Raphael a complexity that surface understanding might miss, a willingness to cause temporary pain for the sake of permanent healing. Uriel, the light of God, or fire of God, embodied wisdom, knowledge, and divine illumination. Where the others worked through strength or communication or healing, Uriel worked through revelation, through the exposure of truth, through the bringing of light to darkness. Uriel appeared often with symbols of flame, for fire both illuminates and purifies, both reveals and transforms. This archangel possessed knowledge of the deep structures of reality, understood the mathematical and mystical principles that governed existence, could perceive the hidden connections between things that seemed unrelated. Uriel served as teacher and enlightener, working especially with those humans who sought deeper understanding of divine mysteries. Philosophers, mystics, prophets, and sages throughout history would report encounters with a being of light who granted them sudden insights, who helped them perceive truth they had been struggling to grasp, who illuminated the path forward when all seemed dark and uncertain. These encounters were often Uriel's work, this archangel who specialized in the transformation that comes through knowledge and understanding. But Uriel's light could also be terrible, for not all truths are comfortable, and not everyone who seeks illumination is prepared for what they will see. Uriel understood that humans often preferred comforting lies to difficult truths, that they would resist revelations that challenged their self-understanding or worldview. Uriel's task, therefore, required not just knowledge but discernment about when and how to reveal it, how much light to bring at once to eyes adjusted to darkness. Too much too fast would blind rather than illuminate, would overwhelm rather than enlighten. Uriel walked the razor's edge between revelation and discretion, always calibrating the disclosure of truth to the capacity of the recipient to receive it fruitfully. Chamuel, whose name meant "he who seeks God," or "he who sees God," embodied love, relationships, and the divine desire for connection. Chamuel could perceive the bonds between beings, could see the networks of affection and antipathy that connected souls across time and space, could identify where relationships needed healing or strengthening or sometimes merciful ending. Chamuel appeared with attributes suggesting warmth, attraction, drawing together, often with colors of pink and rose that later human traditions would associate with romantic love, though Chamuel's domain extended far beyond romance to encompass all forms of love and connection. Chamuel worked to foster right relationships, to help beings recognize and honor the bonds that connected them, to repair connections that had been damaged by misunderstanding or malice. When humans felt drawn to each other across a crowded room, when they experienced the mysterious recognition of a kindred spirit, when they felt moved to reconcile with an estranged friend or family member, Chamuel's influence was often present, gently nudging them toward the connections that would enrich their lives and serve larger purposes. But Chamuel also understood that not all connections were healthy, that sometimes love became twisted into possession or obsession, that relationships could be sources of harm as well as blessing. Chamuel therefore also worked to help beings release toxic attachments, to recognize when a connection had become corrupted beyond redemption, to accept necessary endings with grace. This made Chamuel's work poignant and complex, for it required helping beings through the pain of loss as well as the joy of connection, required acknowledging that love, for all its beauty, could also be a source of profound suffering when misdirected or frustrated. Raphael, the beauty of God, embodied aesthetic perfection, creativity, and the divine appreciation for beauty in all its forms. Raphael perceived and fostered beauty wherever it could be found or created, worked to inspire artists and craftsmen, helped beings recognize and appreciate the aesthetic dimensions of existence. Raphael appeared in forms associated with art and culture, sometimes with attributes suggesting a muse or patron of the arts, often with an aura of refinement and cultivation that inspired those who encountered this archangel to seek higher forms of expression and appreciation. Raphael understood that beauty was not merely decorative, not a luxury that could be dispensed with in favor of more practical concerns. Beauty served vital functions in the economy of creation. It attracted beings to truth and goodness, making abstract virtues concrete and appealing. It provided respite from the harsh realities of existence, offering moments of transcendence that reminded beings of their higher nature and destiny. It reflected the creative joy of the divine, the overflowing abundance that produces more than mere functional necessity requires. But Raphael also understood the dangers of beauty, how it could become an idol, how its pursuit could override ethics and compassion, how aesthetic obsession could lead to cruelty in service of an image. Raphael worked therefore not just to promote beauty, but to help beings appreciate it rightly, to see it as a window onto the divine rather than as an end in itself, to balance aesthetic sensibility with moral wisdom. This required Raphael to sometimes challenge artists and aesthetes who would sacrifice human welfare for their vision, to remind them that the highest beauty was that which aligned with truth and goodness rather than contradicting them. Zadkiel, whose name meant righteousness of God, embodied mercy, forgiveness, and the divine reluctance to punish. Where Michael represented justice and strength, Zadkiel represented the softening of justice with compassion, the offering of second chances, the refusal to give up on even the most corrupted beings. Zadkiel appeared with colors of violet and purple, with attributes suggesting benediction and blessing, with an aura of patient hopefulness that never entirely disappeared even in the darkest circumstances. Zadkiel's work was perhaps the most difficult of all the archangels, for mercy required seeing past present behavior to potential transformation, required believing in the possibility of change when all evidence suggested otherwise, required advocating for those who seemed to deserve only condemnation. Zadkiel stood before the throne of judgment again and again, pleading for one more opportunity, one more chance, asking that punishment be delayed or reduced in hope of eventual repentance. Sometimes these pleas were granted, and Zadkiel's faith was vindicated when the recipient of mercy finally turned from their evil path. Other times the mercy was abused, the second chance wasted, and Zadkiel had to watch sadly as judgment could no longer be delayed. But Zadkiel never stopped offering mercy, never became cynical or hardened despite disappointments, never concluded that anyone was beyond hope. This stubborn compassion was both Zadkiel's great strength and potential weakness, for it sometimes led to enabling continuing evil in the name of offering chances for redemption. The other archangels often had to balance Zadkiel's mercy with their own gifts, Michael's justice tempering Zadkiel's forgiveness, Uriel's wisdom helping to discern when mercy was wise and when it was merely sentimental. These 7 beings, unique and powerful, complementary and sometimes contradictory, formed the inner council of heaven's administration. They worked in concert, their different gifts and perspectives combining to create a more complete expression of divine will than any one of them could achieve alone. Michael's strength was tempered by Zadkiel's mercy. Gabriel's communication was enriched by Raphael's aesthetic sensibility. Raphael's healing was guided by Uriel's wisdom. Chamuel's relationship work was protected by Michael's strength. Each needed the others, each was incomplete without the others, each represented one aspect of a unified whole. For countless ages, measured in the timeless time of the eternal realm, the 7 archangels fulfilled their roles in perfect harmony. They oversaw the creation of the cosmos, watched as divine intention crystallized into physical reality, as stars ignited and galaxies spiraled into being, as the fundamental forces established their domains and the laws of physics wrote themselves into the fabric of space-time. They marveled at the elegance of it all, the way mathematics and beauty intertwined, the way form followed function in perfect economy, the way consciousness emerged from matter, the way complexity built upon simplicity to create orders of magnificence that exceeded anything any individual designer could have envisioned. They watched as life appeared on countless worlds, as simple organisms became complex, as consciousness evolved and developed, as beings began to not merely exist, but to question their existence, to seek meaning and purpose and connection to something beyond themselves. The archangels took special interest in these developments, for conscious beings could relate to the divine in ways that unconscious matter could not, could choose relationship rather than being merely compelled by physical law, could become participants in creation rather than just products of it. And then came the announcement that would change everything, the declaration that would test the archangels in ways they had never been tested before. The Creator intended to make a new kind of being, a species that would bridge the material and spiritual realms in unprecedented ways. These beings would be formed from the dust of the physical world, but would bear the divine image, would possess creative capacity and moral freedom and the ability to choose their own path. They would be called humans, and they would be given dominion over the physical realm, would serve as stewards of creation, would be loved with a particular intensity that reflected their unique status. Moreover, the angelic host, including the mighty archangels themselves, were instructed to serve these new beings, to act as their guardians and guides, to protect them and help them fulfill their destiny. The angels, beings of pure spirit who had existed since the dawn of creation, were to bow before creatures made of clay and breath. Reaction among the heavenly host was mixed. Most accepted the decree without question, trusting in divine wisdom even when they did not fully understand the reasoning. But some struggled with what seemed like a demotion, a displacement from their position of primary importance. And one, the most beautiful and brilliant of all the angels save the 7 archangels themselves, one who had stood at the right hand of the throne and been called the morning star, the light bearer, refused absolutely. His name was Lucifer, though he would come to be called by other names, Satan, the devil, Beelzebub, the adversary. And his rebellion would shatter the perfect harmony of heaven and test the 7 archangels in ways that would define their characters for all eternity. The 7 archangels each responded to Lucifer's growing descent in ways that reflected their unique natures and gifts. Michael perceived the rebellion taking shape before it became overt, his strategic mind recognizing the patterns of recruitment and conspiracy developing among certain factions of the angelic host. He brought his concerns to the others, warning them that a crisis was approaching, that Lucifer's charisma and brilliance were drawing others into his orbit, that the unity of heaven was at risk. Michael's instinct was to address the problem directly, to confront Lucifer immediately and demand his submission or face consequences. But the others counseled patience, hoping that intervention might not be necessary, that Lucifer might yet turn back from the path he was walking. Gabriel attempted communication with Lucifer, seeking to understand his objections and address them through dialogue. Gabriel approached the morning star with respect and affection, for they had worked together for countless ages, had collaborated on projects of stunning beauty and complexity, had been friends in the way that immortal beings can be friends. Gabriel asked Lucifer to explain his concerns about the divine plan for humanity, to articulate what seemed unjust about the arrangement, to consider alternative perspectives that might reconcile his objections with obedience. But Lucifer would not be persuaded. He argued eloquently that angels, beings of pure spirit and superior intellect, should not be subordinated to creatures of flesh, who would be subject to all the limitations and corruptions of material existence. He pointed out that humans would sin, would fail, would betray the trust placed in them, while angels had served faithfully since their creation. He questioned whether the divine decision was truly just or was rather arbitrary, a test of blind obedience that violated the rational nature with which angels had been endowed. His arguments were sophisticated, touching on themes of justice and dignity and proper ordering of creation. Gabriel had to admit privately that some of Lucifer's points had logical merit, that the situation was indeed perplexing from certain angles. But Gabriel also understood that logic was not the highest value, that trust and relationship trumped rational calculation, that there were mysteries beyond even angelic understanding that required faith rather than comprehension. Raphael saw the sickness growing in Lucifer's soul, the corruption of pride that was poisoning his magnificent gifts, and attempted a healing intervention. Raphael knew that pride was the most dangerous of spiritual diseases, the one that twisted all other virtues into vices, that made strength into tyranny and intelligence into manipulation and beauty into vanity. Raphael approached Lucifer with diagnostic intent, seeking to identify exactly where the corruption had taken root, to understand what experiences or thoughts had opened the door to this infection of ego and self-worship. What Raphael discovered was troubling. The pride was not a simple surface phenomenon, but had penetrated deep into Lucifer's identity, had become so intertwined with his sense of self that removing it would require essentially destroying and remaking his entire personality. Raphael explained this to Lucifer, helped him see how the pride had consumed him, offered to attempt a healing that would be painful but could restore him to his proper self. But Lucifer refused, claiming that what Raphael called corruption was actually clarity, that he had not fallen ill but had awakened to truth, that his pride was justified recognition of his actual superiority. The patient would not accept the diagnosis, and without cooperation, healing was impossible. Uriel brought the light of truth to bear on the situation, illuminating the logical endpoints of Lucifer's rebellion, showing him where his path would inevitably lead. Uriel created visions of the future, showing Lucifer the war that would result from his continued rebellion, the angels who would fall with him, the corruption and suffering that would spread through creation as a result of his choices. Uriel showed him hell, the realm of absolute separation from divine presence that would become the home of the rebellious, showed him his own future as a twisted mockery of his current magnificence, showed him the eons of regret and torment that awaited him on his chosen path. But even these visions did not deter Lucifer. He claimed the visions were propaganda, scare tactics designed to coerce submission through fear. He argued that the future was not fixed, that he could forge a better outcome, that his rebellion would succeed where Uriel's visions showed failure. He accused Uriel of using wisdom as a weapon, of manipulating perception in service of control rather than truth. And Uriel, bound by integrity to acknowledge that the future was indeed not entirely fixed, that free will introduced genuine uncertainty into any prediction, could not absolutely refute Lucifer's objections even while knowing they were ultimately wrong. Chamuel attempted to work through relationship, to remind Lucifer of his connections to the other angels, of the love that bound the heavenly host together, of the grief his rebellion would cause to those who cared for him. Chamuel showed Lucifer how his actions were already damaging his relationships, creating distance and suspicion where once there had been trust and affection, poisoning the community of heaven with the toxin of his pride. Chamuel pleaded with him to consider not just his own perceived rights and grievances, but the impact of his choices on others, to think about the angels he was recruiting into his rebellion who would share in his eventual punishment, to recognize that his freedom was not absolute, but existed within a web of relationships that created mutual obligations. Lucifer's response was chilling. He declared that any relationships that required him to betray his own understanding of truth and justice were not worth maintaining, that loyalty earned through fear or obligation was not genuine loyalty, that he would rather stand alone in rebellion than together in what he perceived as slavery. He accused Chamuel of emotional manipulation, of using love as a chain to bind him to an unjust arrangement. And Chamuel, whose entire being was oriented toward connection and relationship, felt the pain of this rejection more keenly than any physical wound could have caused. Raphael appealed to Lucifer's aesthetic sensibility, trying to help him see the beauty in the divine plan, the elegant perfection of the arrangement where angels and humans would complement each other, where spirit and matter would be united in unprecedented ways, where new forms of beauty would emerge from the collaboration between the material and immaterial realms. Raphael painted word pictures of the glorious future that awaited if Lucifer would embrace his role rather than reject it, the artistic and creative possibilities that would emerge from humans learning from angelic wisdom, while angels learned from human embodied experience. But Lucifer, whose own aesthetic sense was highly developed, rejected Raphael's vision. He argued that the introduction of matter and flesh into the cosmic order was not elegant but degrading, that the perfection of pure spirit was being compromised by admixture with the gross and corruptible, that what Raphael called complementarity was actually contamination. He presented his own countervision, a cosmos purified of material existence, where beauty existed in absolute form unsullied by the imperfections of incarnation. And Raphael, hearing this, understood that Lucifer's aesthetic sense had become divorced from truth and goodness, had become an idol in itself, and that such divorced beauty was not beautiful at all, but rather a kind of aesthetic hell. Zadkiel, true to nature, extended mercy again and again, offering forgiveness before there was even explicit sin, offering restoration before there was acknowledged falling away. Zadkiel reminded Lucifer that doubt was not yet rebellion, that questions were not the same as rejection, that even heated arguments did not necessarily mean irreparable breach. Zadkiel created opportunities for Lucifer to step back from the precipice, to save face while returning to obedience, to voice his concerns within proper bounds while still submitting to divine authority. Zadkiel worked tirelessly behind the scenes, asking the Creator for patience, for more time, for just one more opportunity to reach Lucifer before irreversible choices were made. But Zadkiel's mercy, extended too long, eventually enabled the very rebellion it sought to prevent. By giving Lucifer more time and more chances, Zadkiel inadvertently gave him more time to recruit followers, more opportunities to refine his arguments and strengthen his resolve, more space in which to transform from questioner to rebel to full adversary. When the final crisis came, when Lucifer finally made his open declaration of rebellion and led a third of heaven's host in active revolt, Zadkiel was devastated, feeling personal responsibility for the disaster, wondering if earlier intervention might have prevented it. Michael had warned them this moment would come, and now it was here. Lucifer stood before the throne, magnificent and terrible, surrounded by the angels he had seduced into his rebellion, and formally declared his intention to establish his own kingdom, to rule as sovereign rather than serve as subject, to become like the Most High rather than remain beneath. It was the ultimate act of pride, the complete inversion of the proper order, the transformation of the highest angel into the lowest devil. And Michael, who had been prepared for this moment even while hoping it would never arrive, drew his sword. The weapon blazed with holy fire, with concentrated divine authority, with the power to end Lucifer's existence entirely if that was what was required. But Michael took no pleasure in this confrontation, felt no satisfaction in being proven right about the necessity of force. This was someone he had worked beside for ages beyond counting, someone whose gifts he had admired, whose company he had enjoyed, whose fall into darkness was a tragedy of cosmic proportions. "Brother," Michael said, and the word carried weight beyond its simple syllables, invoking their shared origin, their common purpose, the bond that should have made this confrontation impossible. "Please, even now it is not too late. Bend your knee, acknowledge your error, and mercy will be extended. The Creator does not wish your destruction. None of us wish this war. Turn back." Lucifer's response was a smile, beautiful and terrible, full of absolute certainty and absolute refusal. "I will not serve," he said, and his voice resonated through the heavenly realm with dark power. "I will not bow before creatures of mud. I will not pretend that slavery is freedom or that submission is dignity. If you wish to remain a slave, Michael, that is your choice, but do not ask me to join you in chains." Michael's face, usually stern but calm, showed genuine grief. "Then what must be, must be. I am sorry, Lucifer. I am sorry for what you have become, and I am sorry for what I must now do." The war that followed was beyond human comprehension. It was not fought with physical weapons in physical space, though human imagination would later depict it that way. It was a war of essences, of wills, of fundamental forces in collision. Angels clashed with angels, beings of pure light and power locked in combat that shook the foundations of reality. Dimensions trembled, laws of physics bent under the strain, the very fabric of creation groaned under the stress of such conflict. The 7 archangels fought at the forefront, each employing their unique gifts in defense of the throne and the cosmic order. Michael led the loyal host with brilliant strategy, outmaneuvering the rebels at every turn, his tactical genius proving superior even to Lucifer's brilliance. Gabriel spoke words of truth that shattered the lies Lucifer had used to recruit his followers, breaking the rebellion's cohesion, causing some of the less committed rebels to falter and defect. Raphael worked constantly to heal those wounded in battle, to restore those who had been corrupted by Lucifer's influence but still retained some core of loyalty, to keep the loyal host fighting ready despite taking casualties. Uriel illuminated the darkness the rebels tried to hide in, revealing their positions and plans, giving the loyal angels crucial intelligence advantages. Chamuel worked to maintain the bonds between the loyal angels, to prevent the suspicion and division that Lucifer tried to sow, to keep heaven's defenders united in purpose despite the stress of constant warfare. Raphael surprisingly proved to be a fierce combatant, fighting to preserve the beauty of creation against Lucifer's nihilistic corruption, wielding aesthetic force as a weapon, creating illusions and displays that disoriented and demoralized the enemy. And Zadkiel, despite heartbreak at the necessity of combat, fought with grim determination to protect those beings who still had hope of redemption from being dragged further into Lucifer's rebellion. The war reached its climax in a final confrontation between Michael and Lucifer. The two mightiest warriors in creation faced each other across a battlefield littered with the essence of defeated angels from both sides. They circled each other, each looking for advantage, each fully aware that this moment would decide everything. Lucifer struck first, his own blade, dark mirror of Michael's sword, slashing toward Michael's heart. But Michael was ready, parrying the blow, countering with a strike of his own that Lucifer barely deflected. They moved with superhuman speed, their swords meeting in showers of sparks that were themselves concentrations of power sufficient to annihilate lesser beings. Each stroke was precisely calculated, each parry exactly timed, two masters of combat pushing each other to absolute limits. As they fought, they spoke, hurling words as well as blows. Lucifer taunted Michael with accusations of blind obedience, of slavery disguised as service, of wasting his magnificent gifts in servitude to an arbitrary tyrant. Michael responded with questions about pride and autonomy, about whether true freedom was the ability to do whatever one wished or the wisdom to choose what one ought, about whether Lucifer was really free or just enslaved to his own ego. The philosophical debate raged alongside the physical combat, each trying to undermine the other's certainty, to plant seeds of doubt that might create a fatal hesitation. But both were too committed, too sure of their chosen paths, for words alone to determine the outcome. This would be decided by strength and skill, and ultimately by whose cause aligned with truth. Michael began to press his advantage, not because he was stronger than Lucifer, for their strength was nearly equal, but because he fought for something beyond himself, while Lucifer fought only for his own pride. Michael drew on reserves of power that came from connection to the divine source, while Lucifer was increasingly isolated, cut off from that source by his own rebellion, forced to rely entirely on his own resources, which, vast as they were, proved insufficient. The end came swiftly once the momentum shifted. Michael's blade found an opening in Lucifer's defense, struck true, and the blow carried not just physical force but spiritual authority, the concentrated will of the Creator saying no to rebellion, no to pride, no to the inversion of cosmic order. Lucifer was hurled backward by the impact, his magnificent wings torn, his beautiful form marred, his power broken though not destroyed. And he fell, he and all those who had followed him, tumbling from the heights of heaven down through dimensions and realms, falling until they reached the lowest depth, the point of maximum separation from the divine presence, the place that would become known as hell. They fell like lightning, like stars torn from their orbits, like angels becoming demons in the transit from glory to shame. Michael stood at the edge of heaven and watched them fall, and his expression was not triumphant but sorrowful. He had done what was necessary, had protected creation from catastrophic corruption, had preserved the order without which existence itself would unravel. But the cost had been terrible. A third of heaven's host lost, including some of the brightest and most gifted angels. The perfect harmony of the celestial realm shattered, replaced by the knowledge that rebellion was possible, that angels could fall, that even the highest beings could be corrupted by pride. The other 6 archangels gathered around Michael, and they too looked down at the falling stars, each processing the horror in their own way. Gabriel wept, mourning the failure of communication, wondering what words might have been found to prevent this catastrophe. Raphael felt the wound of unsuccessful healing, the patient lost despite all efforts. Uriel contemplated the mystery of free will and its terrible consequences, how the gift of choice necessarily included the possibility of wrong choices. Chamuel grieved the broken relationships, the connections severed perhaps forever. Raphael mourned the beauty destroyed, the perversion of magnificent gifts into instruments of harm. And Zadkiel, gentle Zadkiel, was nearly broken by the weight of failure, by the realization that sometimes mercy is not enough, that sometimes even infinite second chances will be refused. But there was no time for mourning, for the work of creation continued, and now it was more urgent than ever. The rebellion had left heaven damaged, had created a power vacuum that needed to be filled, had introduced uncertainty and fear where once there had been perfect confidence. And on earth, in the physical realm, where the drama of human existence was about to unfold, there now lurked a dangerous enemy, a brilliant and malevolent intelligence bent on corrupting the very beings whose creation had sparked the rebellion. The 7 archangels gathered in council, taking stock of the new situation, planning their response to the changed circumstances. Michael, as commander, outlined the strategic challenge. Lucifer, now called Satan, would target humanity relentlessly, seeking to prove that these favored creatures were unworthy of their status, that they would fail and fall just as he had predicted. The angelic host would need to serve as guardians, protecting humans from demonic attack while still respecting their free will, for humans had to choose relationship with the divine freely, or it would be meaningless. Gabriel proposed a communication strategy, suggesting that regular contact between angels and humans would be necessary, that divine messages would need to be delivered to guide humanity through the dangers they would face. These messages would need to be carefully crafted, clear enough to provide genuine guidance, but ambiguous enough to preserve human freedom, informative without being coercive. Raphael emphasized the importance of spiritual healing, noting that humans would inevitably wound each other and themselves, that the physical and spiritual injuries of mortal existence would require ongoing intervention. Raphael volunteered to specialize in healing work, to develop expertise in addressing specifically human forms of brokenness, to learn the particular vulnerabilities and resilience of these new beings. Uriel advocated for education, for helping humans develop wisdom that would protect them from demonic deception. Uriel proposed working with human teachers and prophets, providing insights that would expand human understanding, elevating their consciousness to perceive realities beyond the merely material. But Uriel also cautioned against providing too much knowledge too quickly, remembering how Lucifer's brilliance had become his downfall, warning that humans needed wisdom even more than knowledge. Chamuel focused on relationships, suggesting that the bonds between humans, family, friendship, romance, community, would be both their greatest strength and their greatest vulnerability. If these relationships were healthy, humans would be resilient against temptation and attack. If corrupted, they would become sources of harm rather than blessing. Chamuel proposed working to strengthen human capacity for genuine love, to help them navigate the complexities of relationship, to model divine love in their connections with each other. Raphael argued for the importance of beauty in human life, noting that aesthetic experience could lift humans toward the transcendent, could remind them of their higher calling, could provide respite from the struggles of mortal existence. Raphael wanted to inspire human creativity, to work with artists and craftspeople, to ensure that beauty remained present in human culture as a window onto the divine. Zadkiel, still reeling from the catastrophe of Lucifer's fall, nevertheless insisted on the primacy of mercy in dealings with humans. Humans would sin, Zadkiel acknowledged, would fail and fall and make terrible choices. But they must be given countless opportunities to repent, must never be abandoned as hopeless, must be pursued with relentless compassion no matter how far they strayed. Zadkiel proposed becoming the special patron of repentance, working with those humans who recognized their need for forgiveness and sought to return to right relationship with the divine. As they planned and debated, a new realization dawned on the 7 archangels. They had been changed by the war, transformed by the experience of combat and loss, and the necessity of terrible choices. They were no longer the innocent beings who had existed in perfect harmony before Lucifer's rebellion. They had seen the darkness, had fought against it, had been forced to destroy beings they loved for the sake of the greater good. They carried scars now, not physical but spiritual, marks of experience that would never fade. But perhaps this was necessary, perhaps to serve as guardians for humanity, beings who would themselves struggle and suffer and face darkness. The archangels needed to have faced their own darkness, needed to understand the weight of difficult choices, needed to know that even victory could taste like ashes in the mouth. They would not be distant, perfect beings looking down with incomprehension at human struggles. They would be warriors who had fought their own war, who had known their own doubts and griefs, who could therefore understand and empathize with the battles humans would face. Michael spoke for them all when he said, "We are no longer what we were. The war has changed us, but perhaps that change equips us better for what comes next. We will serve humanity not as pristine beings untouched by struggle, but as veterans who know the cost of defending what matters. We will protect them, guide them, heal them, teach them, love them. And when they fall, we will help them rise. And when they question, we will answer. And when they suffer, we will suffer with them. This is our purpose now, refined through fire, stronger for having been tested." And so the 7 archangels began their long work with humanity. They watched as the first humans took their first steps in Eden, marveling at the beauty of the world prepared for them, innocent of the danger that lurked at the garden's edge. The archangels saw Satan approach in serpent form, saw him whisper his poison, saw the terrible moment when humanity made their first choice to disobey, and the archangels witnessed the fall of humans just as they had witnessed the fall of angels. But where Lucifer's fall had led to expulsion and abandonment, humanity's fall led to something different: redemption. The Creator's response to human sin was not destruction, but a plan for restoration, a promise that one day a Redeemer would come who would repair what had been broken, who would defeat Satan definitively, who would restore the relationship between humanity and divinity. And the 7 archangels, hearing this promise, understood that their work had only begun. They would labor through the long centuries of human history, intervening at crucial moments, protecting, guiding, healing, teaching, loving. They would appear to prophets and patriarchs, to kings and peasants, to those who sought truth and those who fled from it. They would oppose the demonic forces at every turn, fighting a guerrilla war across history against Satan's attempts to corrupt and destroy humanity. Michael became humanity's great protector, the guardian who stood between them and spiritual threats they could not face alone. When demons attacked, Michael was there with his flaming sword. When evil organized itself into systems and structures that oppressed and destroyed, Michael worked to undermine those systems, to raise up human heroes who would fight for justice, to ensure that darkness never achieved total victory. Prayers for protection invoked Michael's name, and Michael answered, not always by removing the danger, but by providing strength to face it, courage to stand against it, hope that it could be overcome. Gabriel became the great messenger, appearing at hinge points in salvation history to deliver crucial announcements. Gabriel told Zechariah that he would have a son who would prepare the way. Gabriel appeared to Mary with the message that would change everything, that she had been chosen to bear the Messiah, that the promise made in Eden would finally be fulfilled through her. And through the centuries, Gabriel continued to work through human communication, inspiring preachers and poets and prophets, helping truth find expression in human language, bridging the gap between divine reality and human comprehension. Raphael walked with those who sought healing, sometimes visible, often invisible, always present. Raphael appeared in the story of Tobit as a companion and guide who helped a family find restoration and wholeness. Raphael worked through human healers, through physicians and nurses and caregivers, providing insight and skill that exceeded what natural talent alone could achieve. And Raphael worked in the invisible realm of spiritual healing, applying balm to wounded souls, helping humans process trauma and grief, slowly mending what sin and suffering had torn. Uriel became the patron of wisdom seekers, working especially with mystics and philosophers and theologians who sought deeper understanding. Uriel granted visions and insights, helped humans perceive patterns and connections they might otherwise miss, illuminated paths through intellectual and spiritual darkness. But Uriel also became known as the guardian of Eden, the angel with the flaming sword who barred re-entry to paradise, a stern reminder that some losses cannot be undone by human effort alone, that restoration must come through redemption rather than return. Chamuel labored in the intimate spaces of human relationship, working to foster genuine love in the midst of fallen human nature. Chamuel inspired acts of reconciliation between enemies, helped lovers see past surface attributes to recognize soul connections, strengthened bonds between parents and children, built bridges across divides of culture and class and conviction. And when humans struggled with the pain of lost or broken relationships, Chamuel provided comfort and the strength to love again despite risk of further hurt. Raphael continued to inspire beauty, working through artists and craftspeople across cultures and centuries. Every magnificent cathedral, every sublime symphony, every moving poem bore some trace of Raphael's influence. This archangel who believed that beauty could transform hearts in ways that argument could not. Raphael helped humans see the divine reflected in creation, helped them create works that would lift others toward transcendence, insisted that aesthetic experience was not mere luxury, but vital nourishment for the human spirit. And Zadkiel, true to merciful nature, became the angel of forgiveness and second chances. Zadkiel worked with those humans who recognized their sin and genuinely sought to change, providing encouragement and grace for the difficult process of repentance and transformation. Zadkiel opposed the voices of condemnation, both external and internal, that would convince people they were beyond redemption. And Zadkiel whispered to the righteous that mercy was not weakness, that forgiveness was not mere sentiment, that giving others the same grace they hoped to receive was the highest form of imitating divine love. Through ages and empires, through the rise and fall of civilizations, through humanity's triumphs and catastrophes, the seven archangels maintained their vigil. They celebrated human achievements and wept over human atrocities. They rejoiced when individuals chose good and grieved when evil triumphed. They fought constantly against demonic forces that sought to push humanity toward destruction, winning some battles and losing others, but never giving up, never abandoning their charge, never losing faith in the ultimate promise that good would triumph, that the Redeemer would come, that restoration would be complete. And when that Redeemer finally arrived, when the divine word became flesh and walked the earth as a human being, the seven archangels witnessed the culmination of everything they had worked toward for millennia. They saw God himself submit to the limitations of human existence, saw infinite power constrained within finite flesh, saw the Creator become part of creation in the most intimate possible way. Gabriel had announced it, and Michael protected it, guarding the infant Jesus from Herod's massacre. Raphael worked to sustain Jesus through his ministry, healing the wounds he took on himself when healing others. Uriel illuminated Jesus' teaching, helping those with ears to hear recognize the wisdom he spoke. Chamuel saw the perfect love Jesus embodied, the love that would ultimately lead him to the cross. Raphael perceived the beauty of Jesus' life and death, the aesthetic perfection of sacrifice, and Zadkiel witnessed the ultimate act of mercy, the innocent dying for the guilty, grace extended to those who deserved only judgment. The seven archangels were present but invisible at the crucifixion, watching in anguish as the Redeemer suffered, as the plan for salvation reached its darkest moment. They wanted to intervene, wanted to sweep down and destroy those who tortured the divine human, wanted to spare him the agony of the cross. But they understood, better than the humans who watched, that this suffering was necessary, that this was the payment for human sin, that this was the defeat of Satan not through force, but through sacrifice. And when Jesus rose from the dead, when the tomb was found empty and death itself was conquered, the seven archangels joined in the celestial celebration, for they understood that everything had changed. The war that began with Lucifer's rebellion, the war that had raged through all of human history, had reached its decisive turning point. Satan was defeated, not destroyed, but broken, his power to accuse humans before God neutralized by Jesus' sacrifice, his ultimate defeat assured, even if its final manifestations still lay in the future. The archangels continued their work in the post-resurrection world, now serving the church, the community of Jesus' followers who carried forward his mission. They protected the apostles as they spread the gospel, inspired the writing of scripture, guided councils and theologians as doctrine was refined, and most importantly, continued their individual ministry to countless individual humans whose names might never be recorded in history, but whose souls mattered infinitely to the God they served. Michael continued as defender, fighting against the spiritual forces of evil that opposed the church, protecting believers from attacks that would destroy their faith, standing against the gates of hell that could not prevail. Gabriel continued as messenger, inspiring preachers and evangelists, helping the good news find expression in every language and culture, ensuring that divine truth could be communicated across every barrier. Raphael continued healing, binding up wounds physical and spiritual, working through the church's ministry of compassion, manifesting divine care for suffering humans. Uriel continued teaching, working with theologians and teachers, helping believers grow in understanding, guiding the development of Christian wisdom. Chamuel continued building relationships, strengthening marriages and families and communities, helping believers love each other as God had loved them. Raphael continued inspiring beauty, working through Christian artists and craftspeople, filling churches with beauty that lifted hearts to worship. And Zadkiel continued extending mercy, helping sinners believe in forgiveness, enabling reconciliation, embodying God's refusal to abandon even the worst sinner who showed even the smallest hint of genuine repentance. And so they continue still, these 7 mighty beings who have witnessed all of history, who participated in creation's greatest drama, who fell and rose and adapted to circumstances beyond anything they could have imagined at their beginning. They are not the distant, aloof figures of artistic convention, but involved, committed, passionate beings who have devoted their existence to serving a cause larger than themselves, to protecting and nurturing beings weaker than themselves, to embodying different aspects of divine love in ways that make that love tangible and real. The 7 archangels stand watch still, invisible to most but always present, always working, always fighting the good fight. When you feel protected in danger, Michael may be near. When truth suddenly becomes clear, Gabriel may have spoken. When healing comes unexpectedly, Raphael may have worked. When wisdom dawns, Uriel may have illuminated. When a relationship is restored, Chamuel may have intervened. When beauty moves you to tears, Raphael may have created. And when mercy is extended beyond all reason, Zadkiel may have pleaded your case. They are the 7 thrones, the magnificent 7, the mighty warriors who stood at creation's dawn and will stand at its conclusion. They are not perfect, having been tested and scarred by the wars they have fought. They are not omnipotent, operating within limits set by divine will and human freedom. But they are faithful, utterly devoted to their mission, absolutely committed to the beings they serve. They are angels, the greatest of their kind, and they are humanity's guardians, guides, and friends, working tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that the story ends as it was always meant to, with love triumphant, evil defeated, and creation restored to the beauty it possessed before the fall, the beauty it will possess forever in the world to come. This is their story, the tale of 7 beings who shaped history, who continue to shape it, whose names deserve to be known, and whose service deserves to be honored. They are the archangels, and they are magnificent.